Hey, well, I'm not sure about all that, but I am very keen about what Celia was saying because I'm of that age range where actually a very successful Abundant Life project was saying I'm going to be very interested in. I hope it's going to be a success, and because I might well be living here and buried here and everything else. But I think for me, the attraction of Dartington, and this is a serious note, is exactly what Celia was saying. Values, principles, and looking back at the legacy of the Elmhurst, is that we are in a very special place. And I think as you walk into the courtyard here, it just strikes you. There's not a lot wrong with the world. If a special place can produce good ideas, it's a very heady mix if you get the right people here. So I think it's a great opportunity tonight to get all of us here to be involved in, in a wonderful place like Dartington. The title was something that I, like every good teacher, I subvert, and what I want to talk about is just about the partnership that education should be having with business. And, I can remember when my wife became pregnant, I hadn't noticed how many pregnant people were about, but then everywhere I looked, there was lots of pregnant people about. And it's a bit like having agreed to talk about this tonight, about business partnership and education. Suddenly, I'm sort of overwhelmed by the number of things happening about business and education, and the CBI not least amongst those. But, I mean, just for instance, the Observer on Sunday wrote yet again about another government strategy. I mean, Ed Balls is the government initiative overload man. I mean, he is an amazing guy. But, this one, another great proposal is about growing this idea that they're going to introduce careers advice to primary school children. And I'm thinking, this is wonderful. How many people here have got people at primary schools? Yeah. Yes, your kids are going to be advised about their future careers. The point is, though, that, again, where it shows the flawed thinking of the government is that Ball says, and I'll quote him here, that he wants to have an end to the old boys network. And this is a comment that, for the women here, you'll understand well, because most of you, I imagine, would have had to fault the old boys network. That means that only children from privileged backgrounds get their foot in the door. I wonder, the Observer, I wonder if this applies to the private schools, who seem to be absolutely brilliant at networking and getting the foot in the door and privilege and everything else? Or is it just our poor state school kids who need to get their foot in the door? And so therefore, I'm just concerned about this tinkering. And then last Thursday I read that the Education Employers Task Force, a 3-year initiative with £1.15 million to better prepare young people for the skills and experiences they need to experience for the world of work. That was founded last week. Why? Well, why? Because against this background, there's 928,000 16 to 24-year-olds unemployed, 19% of the age group. Now, the fact is, in a recession, I reckon you could take every age group and you can see vast proportions of the age group who are no longer in work. But the reason for young people is obviously, it's a generation that could be lost to long-term unemployment. I would also suggest there's another reason, and that is, and again, like many education acronyms, NEETs, not in education or training, that group of people up to the age between 16 and 30, people who have never been into education or into training, are 3 times more likely to get involved in crime than those people who are in employment. So, it's quite clear, and I understand it, the reason why that any government, whether it's a Labour government or a Tory government, are interested about addressing the whole issue about unemployment for young people, because they are troublesome. Young people out of work are troublesome. Young people not in school are troublesome. However, it's my belief that these proposals could be considered tinkering on the edges until we have a greater understanding and partnership and working together between schools and business. And I have to say that as a head teacher for 17 years and a deputy for that in Cambridge, the education advice that is now about in schools is next to useless. I mean, it was useless when I was at school. I was told that I was keen on sport, I was playing rugby, joined the police force to join the army. The idea of joining a uniformed organisation was the last thing that a long-haired person in the 1960s wanted to do. Nobody was going to cut my hair, but I wanted to play sport. But the fact is that we have a situation in our society where lots of young people end up, and this is why I talk about damaged goods, end up not getting the qualifications they need to go into the world of work, or they seemingly think that. And I just want to qualify that. The single tariff that now exists for children to gauge themselves as being successful is 5 A stars to C, including English and maths. That is a tariff. That's a tariff that, when I was at school, would be equivalent of GCE, a GCE grade. So there's many children, by the time they get to 14, who know where they stand in the scheme of things. A child who tries their best, but for all their endeavours, won't pass that threshold. All those attributes of enthusiasm, good attendance, willingness to give it a go, all the things that you will want to see as a good employee do not exist on that record of achievement. It won't open the doors in the same way that exam success does. So how do young people cope? Well, a great number of them bunk off. And again, what happens is that it's a bit like after the stable doors open, that there's new legislation, which means that Eyes Ahead can increasingly now send people to court. Through the Educational Welfare Service, we can actually prosecute parents who struggle to get their kids in school, who may be struggling with money, but actually they have another burden of meeting a court fine or court appearance. And actually people have been to prison for not sending their children to school. Many children become depressed. Celia just mentioned, 2007 UNICEF report that the UK had the worst overall ranking of well-being for children. The UK was right at the bottom of peer relationships. When they asked teenagers about their peer relationships, about their friendships and the way they work with other people, only 40% of British youngsters described their peers as kind and helpful. Compared to first place Switzerland, where 80% of the youngsters talked positively about their friendships. Why? Because schools are individual places. Schools, if you work with somebody else, you're copying. If you hand in a piece of work that isn't your own, it won't count. So it's an individualized program that happens in schools. A report from the Work Foundation in 2007 said schools are seen by young people as failing to equip them with the ability to learn for life, rather than for exams. Schools are about learning for exams. Why? Because schools are accountable through their success in exams. The new Ofsted inspection that came out in September, which I was part of the pilot, I didn't invite them to be part of the pilot, I just was part of the pilot, meant that, the school, multitude of things happening. The overwhelming grade in this sort of pyramid of grades was attainment. So schools that don't get attainment get put into this thing called national challenge. They get named and shamed. And for schools like you as businesses, and we share many things. I was running a school of 1,800. I was running a school with a budget of 8.5 million, 250 staff. We needed kids in school. Every child had a price tag. They were worth at least £3,750. If we lost the confidence of parents, then, the school would be in trouble. So again, these performance targets, the type of things that the Daily Mail celebrate loud and clear, mean that schools are obviously concerned with attainment. So as a leader of a school, I wrestled with all these issues, encouraging, motivating the students to get them to do their best, knowing that there was no public acknowledgement of their achievements outside public exam success. And as I say, this is even now firmly in place. The consequence of this is that this idea of damaged goods, and some of you in your work will actually get youngsters coming to you who feel pretty fed up about themselves. 45 to 50% of the students in this country do not get 5 A stars to C. No matter, they don't know that flavour and that taste of success. They just understand failure. They walk in the shadows. They keep their head down. They walk next to the wall. They don't look at people in the eye. They look at their shoelaces when they're being spoken to. And yet the business world, we know, talks about creative thinkers. We know you talk about independent learners. We know you want people to be team workers, to be resilient, to be enthusiastic, to pick up new skills. And this is not shouted. I'm just saying, in a school community, this is not shouted from the rooftops by the business community. What we hear from the business community is another thing like the CBI last week saying that kids aren't coming out of school with the right skills. And yet we are absolutely nailed to the floor in terms of getting kids through jumping over certain hurdles. It could be addressed. It could be addressed if we had portfolios of evidence of children doing other things. And instead of, always the business community or whatever undermining what schools are doing, and bear in mind that the school curriculum in 2009, with about a 2% difference in different subject areas, is exactly the same as the school curriculum in 1907. If you look at the school curriculum in 1907, you'll just see things like drawing instead of art, you'll see things like homemaking instead of home economics or food technology. But it's largely the same. We don't have a curriculum that reflects the way that the world is today. And interestingly, just to say that many of you who've got teenagers, I mean, when I was at school, you could do typewriting. We don't do typewriting any longer. The kids themselves learn how to use keyboard skills brilliantly in their own time. There's a lot of learning going out there in their own time. There's people talking, futurists I've heard talk about, saying that youngsters now go to school to have a relaxing time before their real learning takes place out of school. So the fact is, what I'm trying to say, what I want to say to you, is that despite all these things that the government are trying to do, careers advice to 10-year-olds, they've raised the school leaving age. Those youngsters in school now in year 8, the 12 and 13-year-olds, are going to be there until they're 17. That's gone up. There's not a big fuss about it. The school leaving age raised to 17. It's going to be raised to 18, I'm sure, shortly. Functional skills. Employers are saying that GCSE in English and Maths is not really worth it a lot. Functional skills are now being introduced, so actually about real-life application of English and math skills and ICT. There's a general recognition, though, that the UK in the future has to rely on the wit and wisdom of its workforce. We're not a country that has great reserves as natural resources, but we do have these wonderful creative people. And I've worked with them. They are wonderfully creative. And I think that we've got to get the business community engaged with schools and not just paying lip service to government initiatives which are flawed. It's interesting, I'm now actually teaching on the diploma course, the new 14-19 diploma course, with the first cohort of students being trained to teach on it. The first time that employers have been engaged with educationalists on writing the course. And all those skills you're talking about are actually now part of it. 50% of the learning is applied. 50% of the learning has to be applied to the place of work. And, for the first time, I've had time to look at it properly, and I'm so excited by it. But I'll tell you what, it won't happen. The next government may well shove it to one side, because the great problem is assessment. This country is besotted with assessment. It is the only way that we know to actually monitor what schools are doing, because the government, whatever colour, are very, very frightened about giving any responsibility to teachers. So what I'm saying is that there are good signs there, and what we've got to do, I think, instead of schools becoming your short-circuiting your procedures of recruitment, and I remember having this debate with people doing Leeds University, applying people doing law, and they were saying, well, you might write these long things about a student and what they're worthy of doing. We look at their grades, and if they've got A and B grades at A level, we'll interview them. And I said, well, even if they've got absolutely nil interpersonal skills, yeah, we'll look at them. So the fact is, if business stops using schools to actually short-circuit the actual process of talking to people, because further down the food chain, when you get youngsters going for semi-skilled and unskilled jobs, you're working with youngsters who've often had a pretty poor experience at school in terms of their exam success. And my challenge to us in the Southwest, into this community here, next week, in 2 weeks' time, if every employer in this area said, we want every person who applies for a job out from a school has to write down what did they do which involved working with other people. What did you do about solving a problem? What did you do about addressing an issue like bullying or friendship falling out? What did you do about taking responsibility for something that you saw needed to be done? Now, if that was added to every application form, if we just took this part of the country and actually said to each other, we insist that goes on, and then we tell the schools will welcome it. The schools will welcome it, the students will welcome it, because they will see other things that they can celebrate, because we have here fabulous young people who are ready to take up the challenge. Thank you.